Hello, everybody. Welcome to this virtual event for the launch of our new report and exciting discussions on building the Electrification Alliance, bridging along and across value chain. My name is Martine Provost, and I am the Executive Director of the Global Sustainable Electricity Partnership. I'll be your moderator today. Let me say a few words about who we are. The GSEP is composed of world's major electricity companies committed to leading the energy transition. At the heart of our mission is the promotion and acceleration of sustainable electrification worldwide. According to most projections, electricity will become the leading energy source by 2050. Electricity is definitely the low-carbon energy of the future, but to get there, the pace of electrification must double. Together, our companies are engaged in a series of bold actions designed to accelerate electrification of end users. Today, we're launching a report that explores and identifies how partnerships and alliances along and across the value chains can be a game changer in accelerating electrification in the transport, building, and industry sectors, and how they can improve the way we use energy every day. In this report, we sought the experience of actors that are driving sustainable electrification partnerships, and we explored the potential of such alliances in providing a wide range of benefits to society and the environment. On the program today, we start with a presentation of the highlights of the report, which will be followed by a panel discussion. After the panel discussion, we'll take questions from the audience. Participants will be invited to type their questions in the question box that appears at the bottom of your screen and to indicate to whom your question is addressed. So with no further delay, please allow me to introduce our speaker for today, Daniele Agostini, who serves as Head of Energy and Low Carbon Policies at Enel Group, a GSEP member company. Daniele is responsible for policy analysis and corporate position development on energy policies and low carbon policies across the over 30 countries in which the Enel Group operates. He is member of the board of the International Emission Trading Association. He currently chairs the Euroelectric Electrification and Energy Efficiency Working Group, the Energy Transition, Sustainability and Climate Change Committee of the Mediterranean Energy Observatory, and the Energy Markets Committee of the G20Y. So Daniele, welcome, and please start your presentation.
Thank you, Martine. It's a real pleasure today to be here, and I would like to thank GSEP for organizing this event, but also all the partners of GSEP for contributing to the program that we had last year, that actually delivered this report. It's a wonderful report, very, very interesting. It does cover a number of new interesting development in the area of electrification, but also on how companies are moving in this space. So as the world is engaged, if we look at the context, as the world is engaged in this revolutionary energy transition, partnerships and alliances fostering electrification are emerging across sectors and within geographies. These electrification partnerships are enabling technological solutions, innovative approaches, are really thriving and generating with all the creativity of markets, but also operating thanks to policies that unlock new business models and new technologies. So this report is looking at partnerships and how they're performing in favor of electrification and providing the multiple benefits to the energy system we human beings use every day in our daily lives. Electrification in this respect is gaining momentum. It is an essential way of achieving a truly sustainable energy transition, delivering environmental, social, and economic benefits to actors across the different industries. So this was just to give you a bit of the context in which we are operating. If we now look at the structure of the report was really built to focus on the different sections. We have an overview chapter that looks at the findings of the previous report, the new Electricity Frontiers report. That was a 2018 report focused on electrification. And it came up with a number of evidence and findings, but also policy recommendations. In the overview chapter, we also look at the selected value chain actors on what they're doing, what they're saying about electrification. We end the chapter with the stock taking on the open challenges, but also open recommendations for policymakers. After this overview chapter that looks at transport, it looks at the residential building, it looks at the industry building, and it provides you a good overview of what is going on. We have the member contributions. Each member contribution outlines a strategy of the member that is engaging in electrification in the partnerships. It looks at which technologies it is focusing on what partnerships it's engaging in. It has practical examples of case studies of partnerships, but also outlines what are the policies and other frameworks that have enabled these type of partnerships. It's a very rich inventory, if you want, mapping and description of case studies. We have 17 case studies in the report covering over 50 partnerships, upstream, midstream, downstream, really all along the value chain, but also cutting across value chains. If we look a bit at the results on the mobility side, we see how digital is really changing the way actors are moving. Flexible charging services are being offered increasingly more. Infrastructure is developing. If we look at the buildings side, it's a bit slower. Mainly partnerships focus on the manufacturing of new solutions. In the residential sector especially, we have a focus on appliances, but also we see emerging services to customers. On the industry side, things are also very fast moving, like in the industry, in the transport sector, with the prevalent technology being IT, demand response, and hydrogen. So this, again, is a quick overview of what we've seen in the report. But let's look at the different sectors one by one and look at the main findings. So if we move on to transport, we have from our previous report, the findings of our previous report actually outline how much there is still to do in this sector. If we look at today's share, we need to rise from 4% of electrification in transport to over 40% in 2050. So there's really a big gap that needs to be filled. However, massive electrification is running ahead, and it's showing that it is achievable, and thanks also to the sheer reduction in cost of batteries. Rapid EV deployment is moving across the world. The V2G technologies are allowing to multiply the revenue streams that the business models are using to actually make electric mobility economically sustainable, not only environmentally sustainable. Digitalization, on the other side, is going to really revolutionize the market. It's going to make the deployment much more efficient, and it's actually going to support people in the use of the new technologies. And we see this already happening. One of the big leaders, of course, is China today, with more than 200 million two-wheelers on the market and 300,000 electric buses by the end of 2017. In this context, governments have a key role to play, ensuring both long-term objectives, but also making sure that the infrastructure needed is in place. If we move on and look at the main case studies that have emerged in our work, we can see that transport is probably the area in which there's most action going on. We see action distributed along the full value chain, as you can see, both upstream, midstream, but also downstream. We see examples of Enel that is engaging with a number of key manufacturers across Europe and working on fast charging stations and interoperability. But we also see a lot of work being done on the top end of the value chain, for instance, by Hydro-Québec, that is working on the new technologies for the new motors of buses and other electric vehicles. Of course, in China and in Japan, there's also a lot going on along the full value chain. With American Electric Power, we've seen in the case study how also the focus on retail is helping to better understand how consumers will react to these new technologies. In France, with EDF, we're looking at how the entire value chain can cooperate in a more effective way from the upstream to the midstream to the downstream activities. And in Russia, Roshydro is working on fast charging for EVs and spearheading some of the work in Eastern Asia, in Northeastern Asia, in this area. If we move on, let's also look at what happens outside the utility space. And of course, in the upstream part, that's where there's a lot going on with all the major manufacturers that are moving ahead quickly now that we've seen the phase out plan by a number of countries of internal combustion engines. So we see Toyota, we see VW moving in terms of car manufacturing, but also on the battery side and on the electronic side, there's a lot of movement. On the midstream, many retailers are partnering for charging services. We see Walmart and VW with their Electrify America initiative is a very good example. And on the downstream, leading retail companies around the world are adopting electrification partnerships in their last mile delivery. IKEA is an example. It's a well-known household brand, and it's making it a centerpiece of its sustainability policies. But maybe with a much larger impact, we see big players like DHL, UPS, and FedEx and Federal Express actually using electrification in their logistic operations, which have, of course, a large impact, and this impact is going to grow in terms of decarbonization. So if we move to the next slide, we can look at stock taking and the open challenges. And suppliers and car manufacturers have a common shared responsibilities. In this sense, they're really grouping together and partnering and finding out how to manufacture efficiently electric vehicles. But the new frontier is actually now the manufacturers interacting with the rest of the supply chain. And so in that sense, utilities have become very active and have been exploring also new business models. Some of the key enablers that we've seen in this area are clear scene-setting public policies. Often there's too much ambiguity from governments over where they want to go and the rate at which they want to decarbonize transport, which is one of the sectors that is lagging behind. The other big issue, of course, as we all know, is the infrastructure side. One of the key enablers that is actually allowing electric mobility to take off is clear views on the rate of development of the infrastructure. Last but not least, effective regulatory frameworks that allow electric vehicles to actually deliver additional services in terms of flexibility and ancillary services. And this will allow actually to bridge across sectors between transport and electricity. So transport, very active sector, very exciting, very fast moving. If we move forward and we look at buildings, things do change a little bit. In the building sector, if we look at the previous findings, even in this case, the global urbanization and electricity share in global final energy consumed in buildings need to more than double. So there's a lot to do, going from 30% today to 75% in 2050. However, the good news is that there is a significant efficiency potential in electrifying buildings. If we look at electric technologies like heat pumps, they actually up to more than 4 times more efficient than their incumbent technology, oil or gas boilers. So both there will be a growth in terms of final energy consumption, but that will be offset by energy efficiency. The fact that we're introducing efficiency with electric technology actually brings in the advantage that consumers will actually see benefits and economic benefits on their final bill, and that will create an extra incentive. Together with that extra incentive of economic savings, we also have improved comfort. Often these electric technologies allow to better tailor heating and cooling and other energy services to the actual needs of consumers. Demand response and distributed renewables will also contribute significantly to how the energy consumption in this sector evolves and how fast it electrifies. If we look at the case studies, we actually see a bit less action. This is probably a sector, again, especially in the residential part of the building sector where things are lagging behind. We can see action on storage and photovoltaic with Enel moving across the full value chain. Hydro-Quebec is focusing very much on the retail with home automation devices that actually work on ensuring the best comfort for clients while electrifying and making energy consumption more efficient. If we look at what's going on instead in Russia, we see our Russian member focusing more on the higher part of the value chain on semi-transparent flexible PV panels, which actually have been delivering some very promising performance in lab. And so they're looking at scaling it out and deploying it and using it on buildings. Again, in France, very strong action going on in France. Those of you who are familiar with the French building sector know that it is very active, and this is often thanks to the fact that they really have managed to create stakeholder interaction across the full value chain involving engineering firms, architects, together on platforms that are stimulated and set up by the trade associations. If we look at some of what is going on outside of the utility sector, again, we see a lot of movement, and manufacturers are working very hard, and energy service companies are learning how to make sure that the appliances that manufacturers produce can interact in a seamless way with smart meters, with smart grids. And that is a big problem in terms of making sure that the common protocols are adopted. Today, there's a number of communication protocols in the world. Convergence is still too slow given the pace of change that we need to implement in order to address climate change. On the midstream, smart cities is really changing the way people interact and how things are organized. It's really bringing together the full value chain from manufacturers to deployment actors, but also consumers in spaces like smart energy communities that actually provide a good scale for experimenting. On the downstream, again, the most active operators are real estate firms that manage large volumes of real estate. They have economies of scale that allows them to actually quickly move up the learning curve. Where instead we're trailing behind, again, is in the more residential, fragmented private property sector, where instead we're struggling to actually get some of that change rolling. If we move on to the stock taking and open challenges that come out of the sector, we see that the ESCOs and utilities are finding out how to accelerate renovation rates, but that rate of acceleration is too slow. It is bumping into strong economic and non-economic barriers. And I would say between the two, the non-economic barriers that are associated, for instance, with information barriers, or also the challenge of actually training small, medium enterprises on the new technologies are some of the biggest ones. However, promising partnerships are emerging in the building electrification, and they're becoming increasingly relevant. We see infrastructure digitalization is taking up and opening the path to new business models. Especially interesting in the sector is this interaction between different value chains, and we see the mobility interacting with the building sector, but also with electricity sectors, and strong synergies are emerging. Some of the key enablers of this change have been renovation targets, more rapid update of building codes, but also the increasing efforts of governments to streamline administrative procedures. Often permitting procedures slow down the rate of renovation, and these procedures are in the hands of local governments, which often does not have the institutional capacity to handle the new technologies. Now let's move on to our last sector in our study. Last but not least, it's industrial sector. The industrial sector is a very interesting one. If we look at the findings of our previous report, electricity will be central to decarbonizing the industry and increasing its efficiency. That was the first and foremost finding. We need to double the rate of electrification of the sector. And again, that this is even more challenging by the fact that the industrial sector is already doing a lot. Electric technologies, however, can optimize heat processes, and in that sense are very, they have a high potential in terms of also improving the quality of the products in industry. Within this space, the production of clean hydrogen will play a very important role. There is certain areas of industries, I'm thinking of steel, for instance, where it's very hard to use electricity in its pure form, so indirect electrification through clean hydrogen will be key. Other technologies of interest are robotization and 3D printing, which have are potential drivers of electricity demand in this area, and that's why we see growth possible if the right resources are mobilized. Again, smart energy management and smart infrastructure will play a very important role. Looking at the case studies that we've examined in our analysis, we can see how even in this case, action is distributed along the full value chain. And again, I found it very surprising how thriving these initiatives are in addressing the full cycle from upstream to midstream to downstream. Really amazing. The technology, the breadth of technologies is also there. You can see here how Enel, for instance, is engaging in demand side response, more than 100 megawatts from the utility cooperation with actors in the industrial and commercial sectors. With State Grid China is working actively on big data, but also on integrated energy services for online players like Alibaba Group and Alipay. ONE is also working very intensely on the infrastructure development and is planning on being the leader in Africa in this area. And while EDF is working hard on hydrogen, the fuel of the future, is betting on hydrogen also in the transport sector, but at the same time working hard on the digital part of the electrification of industry, working with data and cloud type of communication protocols. Looking at the wider picture of how other value chain actors are being active in this area, we see definitely on the upstream side, a lot of activity on hydrogen production from electrolyzers, and a lot of these efforts are actually approaching demonstration stage. This is particularly true with the large oil and gas players, but also the chemical actors. They're looking forward at replacing fossil fuels with something that looks like a fossil fuel but does not emit, and hydrogen is the closest bet that they have. On the midstream, we see a lot of activity on heat pumps, on the different uses of heat pumps and applications, where on downstream technology companies such as Microsoft, Amazon, and Alphabet are experimenting with electrification technologies in their processes. So again, industry is moving fast thanks to the competitive pressure to make sure that they are as efficient as they can be. So let's look at the stock taking that we did on industry. And I think, again, maybe the most visible is activity on hydrogen, is maybe the biggest innovation going on. Digital 3D reprinting are maybe even a greater impact in many ways. However, it's more marginal and it's improving today, every day. It's not the promise of tomorrow like hydrogen, but 3D printing and digital are really changing the sector today in the way it works. Cooperation with utilities on demand side response, storage, self-production is also a very important part of what's going on in the industry. Some of the key enablers that we've seen in this area are, of course, stakeholder platforms that promote partnering among startups and with large players. We've talked about the experience in France a couple of slides back, but also sectoral coupling policies that are increasingly creating a link between the electric sector, the transport sector, the industry sector, and the building sector. And again, I think some of the recent regulation in the European Union, such as the Energy Performance Building Directive or the Energy Efficiency Directive. More specific regulatory frameworks regulating the way services are provided in the electric sector or the way communication is regulated, also having a big impact in triggering the potential of digitalized electrified technologies. So as we move towards the end of the presentation and the end of the study, let's look at some of the main takeaways from our analysis. Now, again, I've been very impressed by the number of initiatives that are happening throughout the value chain across the world. And here the risk is that by looking at the trees, we're going to miss out on the blooming of the forest. So these initiatives actually are the sign of a big trend, a trend that is drastically and radically changing the way we produce and consume energy in these sectors. And we see electrification becoming dominant thanks to the maturity of the technologies that are penetrating the market. Within this context, partnerships that are emerging are becoming more and more effective, and they assume a number of different forms and colors. In the transport sector, we see a sector that is intensively active in light of the nature of the market that it actually tackles, with greater short to medium term market potential, lighter capex commitments are needed. And so in that sense, there's also a lot of synergies with the shared economy and the new digital technologies. The building sector is somewhat lagging behind. Progress is often hindered by the residential segment. And that's mainly due to the fact that there is a strong high fragmentation, both on the supply side with construction firms, but also on the demand side with clients. Often privately owned homes are not as careful to the new opportunities offered by these technologies. If we look at the industrial sector, we see a sector that is often focusing on a faster time to market opportunities due to the global competitive pressures that they experience. But at the same time, they are keeping an eye for the big break, and the big break will be hydrogen, and the big question will be when it will become competitive. If we look at the existing policy enablers, they have been somewhat supportive. I would say that in most cases, we see a need for innovation. We're using old policies to try to trigger and stimulate new ways of evolving. And so in that sense, some of the new policies, like the creation of stakeholder platforms supported by digitalization, but promoted by governments, are being very effective in actually creating more cooperation, more partnerships along the value chain and across the value chain. So these new type of initiatives are actually what make us very optimistic over the short to medium term potential of these partnerships. We see a great acceleration, and we do need to focus on what are the challenges that these partnerships are meeting, but also what new policy enablers we could implement. So in this respect, again, I'm really very much looking forward to the panel today, which will be discussing some of the issues that we covered in the report. And I'll give back the floor to you, Martine. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniele, for this very insightful and inspirational presentation. I'm sure our panelists can't wait to speak. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our panel, who will share with us their own experience of successful partnerships and their vision of the key policy enablers for accelerating the pace of electrification in their respective environment. Our first panelist, Paul Offerman, serves as Director, Corporate U.S. External Affairs and Head of Corporate International Affairs at American Electric Power. Among his activities, he's responsible for helping find advanced electrification technologies with startup companies worldwide that can potentially improve AEP's distribution grid operations and customer businesses. He is also responsible for working with multi-business coalitions, such as the Global Sustainable Electricity Partnership and the Gridwise Alliance. We also welcome today Nick Woolley. Nick is CEO and co-founder of EV Energy, a startup company based in the UK. Nick is a multi-EV owner and passionate about decarbonizing the energy system. He holds a doctorate degree in power systems. Our third panelist, Nico Narega, serves as Climate Change and Energy Director at the Confederation of European Paper Industries. His role is to represent industry's interests toward the European institutions, international organizations, and relevant stakeholders. He's been working for many years in Brussels on EU-related policies for a wide range of stakeholders. And finally, our speaker, Daniele Agostini from the NL Group, will also take part in the panel discussions. So I'm starting with a first question to Paul Offerman from American Electric Power. In the report that Daniele just presented, you are highlighting the major culture change that AEP has initiated to achieve the energy transition, namely by fully leveraging what technology can do for your customers. And it's clear that you are definitely customer-oriented. So my question to you is what is the role played by partnerships and alliances in the success of AEP's new strategy?
In the history of our organization, starting with electrifying Wall Street years and years ago. And what we've learned through the process is that partnerships are critical to the success of our growth, as well as our customers' experiences with our product and services. So we have a long history, first in focusing on generation, technology improvements, then transmission. And Nick Akins has been particularly focused on the distribution grid space and all of the things that our customers are asking us for, new ways to use electricity. So he's had to reorient and find new ways of doing what we've been doing for over 100 years, but in a much quicker way that is more helpful internally and externally.
So, Paul, well, could you elaborate a little more on your experience at AEP in engaging strategic partnerships with EV Energy that is on the panel today? So I'm asking the question to you first, and then I will turn to EV Energy to see how they see this experience in, well, you have engaged in a strategic partnership in the field of e-mobility, right? So Paul, could you tell me a little more about it?
Well, you put me on the spot here because I hope Nick will just sing praises about his experience with AEP.
We'll see.
But we hope so. And Nick, again, had recognized that the old way of doing partnerships, I should say traditional way of partnerships with big technology companies like General Electric, probably needed to be supplemented with looking for brand new technologies that no one has ever heard of. And this means you go out to accelerator programs like free electrons with the 8 utilities there that annually attract 800 applicants like EV Energy to get in front of corporates like AEP, and then to work through the process of coming up with a scope of work that will demonstrate the potential of a technology in performance or economics to make the business case to find those benefits that work well for us. So Nick, back in 2018, created a brand new innovation and technology group inside AEP to scout out and to prove out these kinds of technologies collaboratively with the startup and our operating companies in our 11 states, as well as our headquartered business units. And we found Nick Woolley and his team through the 2019 class of free electrons and worked through a process including my wife's Kona Electric and Nick Aiken's Tesla to demonstrate how we could manage EV charging without inconveniencing a customer on our grid conditions. So it required a change, and it came from Nick Aikens.
For the benefits of our international audience, Nick Aikens is the CEO of American Electric Power, right? So now, well, I'm turning to Nick. Nick, since the creation of EV Energy, it's a startup company offering residential software tool to manage EV charging with the greenest electricity available. We understand that the company has made rapid progress. Could you give us it's an industry perspective that we're expecting from you, an industry perspective on your partnership experience with AEP as a grid operator? And the second part of my question to you is, has this partnership been a driver for growth and value creation for you and your customers?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. So, I mean, the answer to the second half of the question is very straightforward. Yes, it absolutely has. I think on the first part of the question, I mean, Paul articulated it quite well. So we met AEP through the Free Electrons program in 2019. And what the essence of that program is about is getting together leaders in the corporate space who want to innovate and change with startups like us who are very new to the game and very green in terms of the solutions that we've delivered, and making it safe for both of those parties to collaborate together. And we had a great experience collaborating with Paul and the team at AEP. I think from our perspective, what we were really trying to understand was, can we actually find a product market fit for our smart charging software? Does this actually resonate with what grid operators need, with what customers of grid operators really need? And I think the short answer was, through the Free Electrons program and through working with AEP, that was definitely proved out. And we've now gone on to sell our services to utilities across the world. I think in the space of e-mobility, utilities have a really exciting opportunity. They have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really grab a part of the value chain that traditionally flowed to the oil and gas majors like Shell and BP and all of those big companies. And now electric utilities can serve those customers and deliver innovative solutions. There are challenges as well, and that's what our software helps to deliver against. So obviously, loading up a network at peak times is challenging. But what we've learned with working with companies like AEP is how we can integrate our solutions to enable that to happen, so that we can then serve customers like you or I with a better solution that helps them advance the course of electric vehicles and decarbonization of transport.
Paul, would you like to react on that from a grid operator perspective?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nick, for your kind words. I'll pass them along to Nick Akins. Thanks again. But you're really too modest. I mean, I think that what you offer is way more helpful in many cases to customers in shifting charging to lower rates. And I know that Energy, now E.ON, co-partnered with us, with you, and found that to be absolutely the case. What we're also thinking is time of day rates that are traditional, at least in the 11 states for AEP, are perhaps not as effective as us actively working with a technology like yours to help us manage our grid. And we're not saying here that we're going to have trouble in loading up lots of vehicles, but we don't want any customer to feel like that's going to be a problem. So I know that you've been quite successful in the UK markets that are competitive. Perhaps Martine, Nick could just relate that for a second.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, absolutely, Paul. So we've learned about the different areas. One of the key things we've learned is the different areas of the value chain that the e-mobility touches on. So there's obviously a network piece, and then there's a customer piece. And so in the UK market, of course, both of those pieces are separate, and they're unbundled. So we have network operators who face the challenge of keeping the lights on. They don't serve customers directly, but they have to maintain the infrastructure, and they want to operate that infrastructure effectively. And so what we've built on through experiences like the experience we had with American Electric Power and continue to have with American Electric Power is the ability to understand where those constraints are happening in the grid, and then how we can provide commercial services to deliver to help relieve those constraints. And so in the UK market, for example, we're already commercializing this, having won some of the grid service auctions for EVs in the UK market, providing services directly to the networks. On the retail side, it's quite different. In the retail side, we need to be able to get customers along this journey with us. It's so important that we don't forget that these are individuals that we need to convince about wanting to deliver these services and wanting to get into an electric vehicle, which is a daunting process in its own right, and then charging an electric vehicle and all the associated challenges that come with that. But the good news is there's a big opportunity there, and we're making traction, as Paul says, towards working with other retailers in the UK market, plus internationally, to deliver those services to advance the decarbonisation of transport.
Thank you, Nick. Time's running fast, so I will leave a chance to the other participants to express themselves also. I would like to turn to Nico Narega now. Nicola, you have extensive experience working in Brussels on EU-related public policies for a wide range of stakeholders, such as industry associations, European Commission, NGOs, governmental bodies. You are now representing the European paper industries. So with all that background, what is your perspective on the role played by partnerships in accelerating electrification and building a low-carbon economy?
Thank you, Martina, and thank you, GSEP, for the invitation. I think it's a really exciting time, and I think the report is really nailing what is key nowadays, and that is the issue of partnership. Here in Brussels, we've been going through, well, in Brussels, but it's in Europe, we've been going through major transformations of our energy system. And that has brought a wave of a revolution when it comes to approaching the electricity markets, approaching electricity as such. And I remember 10 years ago, we were talking about the relation between electricity industry and industrial electricity consumers. Yes, we were talking about demand-side response as it was being done for the past decades, but it was all about reducing the electricity consumption. It was all about keeping the profile as flat as possible and help the system reducing stress whenever that moment was coming. Now, if you push forward 10 years, the electricity market is totally different. We have the needs of meeting not only demand and supply at time of critical demand consumption, but also the time of critical supply produced when there is too much of electricity in the system and someone needs to cope with it. And then the magic happens where the system boundaries become extremely blurred, and it's difficult to understand anymore who is the producer, who is the consumer. From the pulp and paper industry, we are the second industrial largest electricity consumer. And we start realizing that actually we can do the reverse demand response, meaning we can take advantage of our energy produced on site to use it as a kind of virtual battery, whereby we were reducing our energy demand and substituting that energy with electricity, which at that time was coming cheap because it was coming from surplus of, for instance, wind produced electricity or from solar. And then again, things suddenly happen sometimes because of a choice, sometimes because of an accident. I have an amazing example from one of our guys in Poland who runs on coal. And one day in wintertime, they had a system failure. So they couldn't use anymore the coal fire boiler, and they had to use electricity. And everybody was a bit concerned, like, okay, what's going to happen now? So they checked the energy bill 1 month afterwards, and they realized that actually they had saved money at that time because the little amount of wind that is installed in Poland was sufficient enough at that time to have a downward pressure on electricity prices, and that allowed them to save money. So they say, okay, why we never did it before? Well, because we didn't know. So then things happen, and in 1 year time, they saved. They did it consistently, and they saved 10% of emissions, carbon emissions, and also they saved money. So what does this bring me to the point today, like collaboration? A lot of these solutions are not known because of cultural element, because of unwilling to change, to test new solutions, and everybody wants to be innovative, but especially on energy-intensive industries that are also capex intensive. Well, everybody wants to be the second, even better, the third in line. So let someone else try. If it works, then we can think about it. So we need to really accelerate this process because there are huge potentials. Just I give one number, then I close it here because otherwise it becomes a bit of a monologue. I'll give you 3 numbers. It's 1, 1, 6. 1 is the amount of energy that the electricity systems sees from the grid, so what we consume from the grid. For every unit of energy that we take from the grid, there is 1 unit of energy that we auto-produce in form of electricity, and 6 units of energy that we produce in terms of thermal heat. This 6 plus 1 that we produce on site can be produced with electricity. So the electricity sector has the potential to go from 1 electricity amount sold to the paper industry to 8, if they want to. This is the potential of demand response that we have as an industry. It's already fully deployed across Europe, and it has the size of the electricity market of the UK. So it's there for you to grab it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nicola. I'll get back to you. I would like to hear Daniele on that. Maybe, Daniele, you would like to pick up on that because the NL Group has also an experience in demand response, and you've presented in the report. So in the report, you say that NL is positioned right in the middle of the demand response value chain, and you've been able to create value for utilities and system operators in this field. So could you just react on what Nicola just said and maybe propose an answer also to the question that he raised about now how, well, there's a huge potential, but how do we do to get there? So Daniele, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks. And Nicola's words are always inspiring because both technically and also culturally, it's quite a journey. We have been working on demand side response for a number of years, and we are among the leaders in the sector. In the report, we have a case study with the Ameren, which is a Missouri utility with more than 100 megawatts of opportunities that we've been starting to collect through CNI clients. And these clients include industrial players like arc furnaces, flour mills, but also things like schools. And it's been striking how, again, as Nicola was mentioning, a lot of this coupling and bridging across sectors is explaining what is there. So to our clients, we provide the technology that enables them to participate in energy and electricity markets. But at the same time, we highlight the economic benefits. Nicola, was mentioning what happened in Poland. And we see the same thing happening all over the world where we engage with NLX in harvesting the huge potential in terms of flexibility. And again, as utilities, we're perfectly positioned. Why? Because we do know how electricity markets work. We have the ability to foresee how pricing is going to evolve in the next 5, 10, 15, I would say even 20 years. And in that way, really understand the opportunities that are there. However, to harvest those opportunities, we do need to engage in an open way with other players. We do not know how to run a paper industry. And again, we had a seminar with the paper industry maybe before the pandemic. It was last year, I think. Nicola organized it, and we had utilities sitting around the table with some of the largest players in the paper industry in Europe and discussing the technology side of both industries and understanding how to actually come together. And concrete opportunities emerged from that. So again, there's a lot there, and I think demand side management, DSR, is maybe the most immediate one. But soon we will see other opportunities. In some ways, in that case, we have the industrial sector contributing to the electricity sector. However, if we go in the other direction, I see a lot of potential for the electricity sector helping the industrial sector do a better job. Along the same ways, and I think we were talking about EV charging in the first part of the panel, we've been among the pioneers, and we're still one of the major players in V2G. And I agree, I think the UK has been one of the most progressive players in this. And why? Because they have a dynamic way of doing regulations. They try things out, see how it works, they adjust them, and we need regulators around the world to pick up on that way of doing things, of experimenting with regulation in order to be able to catalyze those opportunities that are there and are maybe being constrained by regulators that are being too cautious in the way they treat a sector that it is vital, but could be a lot more dynamic than it is today, and will be a lot more dynamic than it is today. It's just a question of timing and leadership.
Well, thank you, Daniele. And before we conclude the panel discussions, I would like each of us to address, that we address with each of us the policy enablers that are needed to help you accelerate your sustainable electrification efforts, and that will allow also successful partnerships just like those that you have described today to happen more often. So to each of us, and I will start with Nicola. What is, in your opinion, the key enablers, the key enablers, to allow you to do more partnerships, just like the ones that we have mentioned today, and that will put your company on the road of success in terms of electrification, of beneficial electrification?
Yes, thanks. I think there are two layers. One, if we're talking about demand side flexibility, then we need to remove all the regulatory barriers that are hindering this type of approach across the markets. And then I think that the partnership will be extremely beneficial, because the electricity industry is the one that knows best the market, while the energy managers in the paper mills and other in industrial sites, they are mostly focused on managing the energy within the processes. So that type of partnership would be extremely beneficial in that respect. If we want to discuss about full electrification, which would be also welcomed, but that requires something else, because at the moment the full electrification will come at a very uncompetitive price tag because of the price difference and the extra cost. So it requires a combination of finding solutions to lower the electricity costs, so not the production, but the cost that pay, and also combining with the electric technologies that can deliver the savings needed to offset the price gap.
Yes, I'm turning now to Daniele. Daniele, in your presentation earlier, you said that the policy enablers are most of the time innovation related. So is this the case? If you had to identify the most productive enablers, the main triggers for these successful electrification partnerships?
Well, I think there's one on the pure policy side. More and more, we need policymakers are still often working in silos. They do not understand that there is more and more coupling across sectors. If I'm looking at the entire debate that we're having on data privacy and data handling associated with smart meters and smart grids, it's a very important debate. I have the sense that often is not really taking advantage of what has been already learned in other sectors in this area. And I would say the same thing in other issues on infrastructure. So on one hand, on the pure policy side, we do need to make sure that there's more connection between the different policy areas and there aren't as many policy silos. Now, of course, we're seeing in Europe this happening, and more it starts being cross-sectoral, and we have cross-sectoral strategies, and that brings additional complexity. But it is important that some of the opportunities are not prevented by the fact that again, regulation in another sector are actually hindering progress. In terms of innovation, I think that the digital world is incredible. It's providing so much information. And I think the platforms, stakeholder interaction platforms, where stakeholders are allowed to interact by looking at reliable data, reality checks on what goes around, what make the entire process a lot more efficient, lower the transaction cost, the search cost of finding reliable partners. So in that sense, of course, the market creates the links. But I think in a global market where it's more difficult to do things just based on handshake, a bit of a reality check from public policy in terms of making sure that some of the information out there is double checked so as to make the entire process more efficient will be quite helpful in facilitating the links that are already happening in terms of partnerships.
Thank you, Daniele. I'm turning to Nick now. Well, do you have anything to add to that? You're in the e-mobility industry. So Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess there's a couple of things. So it was great to hear Daniele mention the UK market. I suppose when I think of policy, I think of there's the top level policy, and then there's the more bottom up initiatives and the regulatory frameworks that we need within the market. The one thing the UK has done that's been really great over the last few weeks has announced a clear direction of travel towards full electrification of transport. And so by 2030, internal combustion engines, petrol and diesel cars for general consumers like you or I, the sales of those will be banned. So that sets, from a top-level policy direction, a clear direction of travel towards the full decarbonization of transport, which obviously we firmly believe in, and I think is absolutely great for industry because it provides certainty over a length of time that we can see, but is far enough so that people can adapt and we know where we're heading. And then I think at the lower levels, I think Daniele made an amazing point around one of the things that we've noticed that's good about the UK market is it allows people to test new regulatory ideas. And I think alongside testing new ideas, it's also about understanding that if the idea costs slightly more or doesn't quite work, that's okay. It's a bit like innovation, really, is that we need to be able to test those ideas, explore those ideas, accept that we might make a few wrong bets, and then learn from that and move on. There is a high degree of uncertainty with all of the things we've been discussing today. And I think policy has to be comfortable with adapting to that level of uncertainty. And that means accepting and learning where we're wrong.
Thank you. And Paul, so we have opened the discussion with you today, and we're closing the panel discussions also with you. What would you like to add to what you've just heard from your colleagues on the panel?
Well, certainly the insights that each of them shared are absolutely correct. If I could maybe put those into a U.S. market context. In the distribution grid space, we have actually 50 markets. They're called states. And so as AEP and other utilities want to use technologies like NICs, first we have to educate the state legislators that actually create the directives for the state economic regulators that approve activities like AEP to offer EV Energy's services to our customers. And so there's an education process that each one of the previous panelists talked about. We have in a structured marketplace from an economic regulating standpoint. And so helping both legislators and regulators understand the cost effectiveness of these technologies, to value resiliency, particularly as the climate changes and more of our service operations are involved with weather, like hurricanes and such. So there is a start to some of these activities, but what's really driving a lot of our interest as AP is our customers are asking for it. They know that there are benefits there. And so, when we go to a legislator or a regulator, it's because our customers want us to go faster. And so we learn a lot from the experiences in Europe, for example, and certainly the sharing process inside GSEP and other coalitions is vitally important, for us to be able to do that.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you to all the panel, because we must now conclude these very stimulating panel discussions, and we have to open now the question period, in which our audience is invited to send their questions to our panelists. Again, so please type your questions in the question box that you see at the bottom of your screen. And we kindly ask you also to indicate to which panelist your question is addressed. So we'll try to answer as many questions as possible within the next 20 minutes. So I'm turning now to the questions. Let's see what we got. I've received a question here. Well, it doesn't mention to whom the question is addressed, but I'm just asking you, is there opportunity for alliances among actors across different sectors, value chains, in order to support the creation of new business ecosystems? So does anyone want to react on that or to answer that question? Maybe Daniele?
Could you repeat it, please, Martine? Could you repeat it?
Is there opportunity for alliances among actors across different sectors and value chains in order to support the creation of new business ecosystems? We're talking here about the creation of new business ecosystems. That's a question that we've received.
Yes, I think that there's I'll give it a shot. I think it's a complex questions. I'll try to give it a short answer. I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. I think it will be interesting to see a lot of them already happening. If you look at a lot of what is happening is still very much focused on the technology and the economic sectors. So it's engineering firms working, with other technical firms looking at business models. We're still lacking the social dimension, the cultural dimension that Nicola was talking about. More and more we see in management schools the psychology moving in economics throughout. And if you recall, again, Facebook, became what it became because someone actually added a new twist to a technology that was there. The new twist was the social, psychological aspect. And so as we will see a more customer-centric approach based on better understanding the behavior of customers, so partnering with companies that are using this data that we're collecting to better understand the behavior and the preferences of customers, be they in the residential, private sector, and the industrial sector, what we call the non-economic barriers. I think we will see a new type of ecosystem evolving, a much quicker uptake of a lot of these technologies, because the providers of these technologies will better understand again, the cultural challenge of the users of the technology, and we'll be able to address that cultural challenge. I think one of the examples, again, is with data. With data, we're having a big backlash on data privacy, at least in Europe. That is happening very much. And again, that was because someone underestimated the sensitivity, and often it's a psychological issue. So as we will be addressing these new, if you want, social and cultural challenges, new companies will emerge that will be able to manage in a better way these issues and make partnerships more successful. And that I think is the part of the ecosystem that is missing. Today we have it within the ecosystem. We have the people who are going to mobilize the money. The financial community is there. The industrial players are there like us. But we're missing the real voice of the final user in terms of social and psychology of how we're going to be using these new technologies.
Yes, makes a lot of sense. Thank you. We've received a question for Nick Woolley. Nick, in your opinion, which is the key stage of the mobility value chain to foster partnerships? You want me to repeat the question? What is the
No, that's great. So which is the key stage of the electric mobility value chain in which to foster partnerships? I mean, that's a really fantastic question. It's a complicated one to answer. So if you look at the e-mobility space, what we have is we have charge point manufacturers, we have vehicle OEMs, and we have energy utilities that are all colliding together around a need to be able to deliver services back to end customers. And so along that value chain, if we talk about somebody getting, say, a home charger at home, there's obviously some manufacturing process that goes on. They get an electric device installed in their home. They then get a service delivered to them. That service may be delivered by a third party or by an energy utility. There are lots of opportunities along that value chain to collaborate. Right at the start of the value chain, there are opportunities to collaborate with big OEMs, so not in the utility industry, but in the car manufacturing industry where the car gets created. At the delivery of power end, it's obviously clearly really important to be tightly integrated with the energy utility. And so I think it is a partnership space by the very nature of the industry and the very nature of the different moving parts in terms of the different actors involved, that partnerships are absolutely critical to enable services to be delivered for the end customer that make sense and advance our societal goal to decarbonize transport.
We've got another question that is addressed to Nico Narega. What kind of new partnerships are you envisioning for the future?
Thanks. This is indeed a key question because we noticed that we understand what are the challenges ahead, but somehow we've been realizing over the past months that we keep on bouncing around the same, like we're asking the same questions and we come in to the same answers, and then we're bouncing again. So what we decided to do was to challenge ourselves and say, perhaps we don't have all the answers, and perhaps others do have the answers or do have the experience with other sectors, and we can learn from the other sectors. So what we've done at the beginning of this year, we have set up something we call the Energy Solutions Forum, where basically we've been very humble and saying, we think we have a problem, but we don't know how to solve it. So can anybody help us? And we've been open to anybody who thought of helping us. And then we start having a conversation with heat pump producers, solar thermal producers, energy companies. And we found that this was extremely beneficial because we realized that we thought that we knew each other, but actually we didn't. So by talking to each other, explaining our own priorities and peculiarities, we learned that actually there was much more ground to be discovered together. And now I'm happy that after almost 1 year that we've launched the process, a lot of things happened that we didn't anticipate. But suddenly, we had examples of utilities who didn't know specifically the sector, but understanding what were the requests from the sector, they said, okay, you know what, we've been providing similar services to other sectors, maybe with a bit of twisting, we can help you out here. Heat pumps, they didn't know the number of industrial sites that in our sector are present. And then when they saw the numbers and when they saw the challenges and the fact that actually they're not too far away, they start putting our industry on their radar screen. And then we start having pilot projects happening here and there. So I think there is a lot, it seems a bit of a paradox that in 2020, we still have an issue of communication, but that's what it is. So what we're trying to do is to really build these bridges and try to make sure that we can have conversation, and from this conversation we can build in moving to the next step, which is further collaboration.
Well, thank you. It's very interesting what you're saying, because you're talking about building bridges, and it comes time after time when you say that, well, technologies, we don't know that they exist. This is why we do not consider them. And as well with partnerships, you say, well, we don't know what the other is doing, so we need to get to know each other much better. And I think that there's work to be done in that field, and this is exactly the purpose of today. I have received the same question for Paul Offelman. So what kind of new partnerships are you envisioning for the future?
Well, I'd say to you that you know, one of the things that we're engaged in at AP is very strongly collaborating with our operating companies who have the customer interface, as well as our own business units, to really understand what they believe are the key ingredients, technologies, and so on for the future. They are very much engaged with the day-to-day operations, providing services to our customers and to keep the grid very reliable and strong. So it remains to us to be creative and to look for new alliances that perhaps don't even exist today. That's one of the advantages of being a part of GSEP with the information that's shared, as well as through the accelerator programs, which capture all of the potential needs of the utilities going forward. And we're agnostic to what kind of new technology there is there. There are things that we probably can't even realize that could be developed into commercialized offerings in the next 2 to 5 years about, you know, some of these things. One of the areas that we're also involved with at AP is working with our U.S. Department of Energy in a program called U.S. Drive. This initiative puts us right with car manufacturers and our national laboratory system for research and development activities, some of it being pure R&D to help us be prepared for the future. And when you are talking to you know, the government agencies, the very smart scientists, you get into areas that are very different than the standard utility partnership that we have so well used and was discussed here. The metallurgy of battery technology, for example. How are we going to recycle all of the EV batteries that are going to be developed in the world from these electrification policies? And so you get to really get immersed in those new kinds of processes. And maybe there's going to have to be a brand new metallurgy for a lot of these, for example.
We still have some time to take another question. The question here is for Daniele and Paul. So as electricity utility companies, one of the key stakeholders in your partnerships is the customer. How are your companies strategically engaging with customers to encourage smarter electric choices that promote electrification and cleaner electricity? So Daniele or Paul?
Daniele, why don't you go first?
Happy to go first, Paul. Thank you very much for that. No, I think and I'm not going to speak necessarily only for the Enel experience, but also for the experience of other utilities. But I think that is maybe the greatest challenge for utilities around the world. We come from a history of regulated business in most countries, so with a rather captive customer base on one hand. On the other hand, we come from a history of a pretty homogeneous good. Wasn't a service, very particular good. You're selling electricity, you have a meter, you deliver it there. This is changing. This is changing both because of the way electricity is being produced. So we have prosumers, so we have, of course, a lot more competition there. The way it's being distributed through digitalization that allows us to better understand the behavior of our customers, but also on the retail side from the demand with the new technologies like electric vehicles and appliances. So the world is really being turned around, and our customer-facing departments are really going through a major cultural revolution. So it's a question of also better understanding how much you can get your own company to evolve and how much you have to disrupt by bringing in outside companies, maybe partnering with others, finding that right balance of turning around your own people, acquiring new business, or cooperating with others. I think in Enel, of course, we're leading in this area. We've been really trying to crack this for the last 15 years. I think we've started ahead. We are following the same model that we've experienced in the renewable energy business. In that business, we actually broke away with a company, separate, dedicated company that was Enel Green Power. We spinned it off. We let it grow outside the main company. And then once it was established, once it actually got that knowledge to thrive, we brought it back in the main group. We're doing a similar type of operation, if you want, with the new services, with the new customers, with NLX. NLX is really experimenting in a very free way. And again, what we're talking about earlier of what is happening in the UK, they need to try things, see if they work, then adjust. That is what NLX is doing with our final customers and being very customer-centric. Of course, there's a lot of successes. There's some unsuccesses, and there's some things that are halfway, but you need to be more dynamic. So in that sense, I think that's what we're doing in Enel, really breaking away with the traditional way of doing things and trying things that are completely different. And again, it's an open innovation type of approach. It's not bending in one direction and just going for it, but trying a number of different things and then adjusting depending on the feedback that you get from our customers. So again, you need to be very much focused on the customers, ready to listen. And I think we've been improving drastically in the last 5 or 6 years in this area.
Yeah.
And that's what our customers are telling us. I have to say, it's not that I'm saying it.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniele. And Paul, in 1 minute, briefly.
Well, our CEO is very fond of saying that we don't want to just be seen as a seller of electrons. In his view, our future is very much tied to helping our customers, particularly our residentials, with a better way of life and business. And so we have lots of teams throughout our states that are designed specifically to be working one-on-one with all of those potential customers and to understand their needs so that they can bring it back to us and we can help them do what they really want to do because they are enabled now. So we are trying to break through a lot of those internal paradigms, but also the external ones that are out there. I think that, as Daniele has said, and we've heard from the other panelists today, this is not about the generation of clean energy, renewables. This is about what people do with that clean energy, and that's what we're all focused on.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's now time to conclude the event. I would like to thank all the panelists for these very good exchanges, as well as our international audience for your interest and participation. The full report can be downloaded by clicking on the link that is probably displayed on your screen right now, or by going to our website at globalelectricity.org. Before we say goodbye, I would like to invite you to join forces with our GSEP companies in accelerating sustainable electrification worldwide and building a lower carbon economy. Should you have successful electrification stories, innovative partnerships, and learnings that you would like to share with us, please contact us. We're eager to know them and help communicate them on our various platforms. I'm also announcing that, well, it's public for the first time, that our chair company for this year, American Electric Power, is currently leading a pioneering study on beneficial electrification, which gives voice to major end users from the transport, building, and industry sectors, and to express their views on what they need to accelerate beneficial electrification in their respective environment. So you see the continuity in our action in the GSEP. I spoke about beneficial electrification. To us, beneficial electrification comes when we can achieve a cleaner energy sector while ensuring an equitable energy transition that provides environmental, economic, and social benefits to all segments of society. We're also proud to announce that under the leadership of AP, we're preparing a major virtual event where CEOs representing major energy suppliers and end users will unveil the results of the study with end users and launch a bold initiative, a bold and ambitious initiative designed to put the vital forces of their respective sectors to work in driving the energy transition towards a low carbon economy through a better use of sustainable electricity. This event will take place at the end of May and will be globally broadcasted. So we hope to have you there. So thank you for attending today and for joining forces with us. In the meantime, keep safe and stay tuned.